Sup everybody, this is Karak with ACG, and as always, it's my continuing mission to bring you reviews that aren't 2 minutes long or filled with sponsored bullcrap. And today I'm stoked to be bringing you the review of Batman the Enemy Within, Episode 3, The Fractured Mask. This is the third episode of the Batman the Enemy Within series by Telltale Games, and it's out November 21st for pretty much every single system. Batman the Enemy Within tells a tale of a different time for Batman, when forces are at play in both elements of his life, pushing against one another, and despite money, resources, and a power base most small nations would covet, Bruce is actually feeling a bit of the squeeze because seriously, teaming up with some of these guys is about as safe as snorting that crust that breaks off battery terminals. But here we are. As always, if you like the video, maybe subscribe. So here's my review for Batman the Enemy Within, Episode 3, Fractured Mask. Decisions you can't roll back on, letting pretty much everyone down, and waking up to realize that you've teamed up with a vegetarian version of Hannibal Lecter. Graphics are up first. You know, surprise, surprise, nothing's actually changed here. You either like this kind of graphical presentation or you don't. And as with the prior titles, you can occasionally notice the age of the Telltale engine, whether it be a small loading stutter here or the odd pop of animation, but the developers do try their best to hide it in camera cuts and adjustments that offer a pretty seamless picture overall. Now, quibbles about the various character designs notwithstanding, I do like that we have a continued stable of different characters all exploring a more traveled Gotham, and that world just feels wider, bigger, and more vibrant because of it. Whether it's the world's most uncomfortable car ride scene from the prior episodes, or this episode's dark skirting of the issues with Harlequin and her father and the odd similarities that Bruce has with him, and all the while she's applying her clown makeup. It does a great job personalizing them with animations as they work through these different things. They do a good job with what they have as well, and if the location isn't the best, personally it feels like the interaction with the characters seems a bit closer and more personal here than they have been in the prior episodes. So overall, you can expect about the same performance and the same look as we've got before. I think there's some fixes here and there, though. If I have any issues with any set piece, it's Riddler's old pad. Now, this is a dude who dressed like a leprechaun and spent most of his life finding out words that rhymed at the end of his sentences, despite them all being pretty bad. And yet the puzzle at his home and just the overall design really makes you feel like Riddler is sorely underused and odd in this series. They keep bringing him back, though he's dead. It's like the writers have all the spirit of old car collectors, collecting these things with horsepower numbers that encroach, needing mathematical theorems to easily explain, and then never drive them around. And it's so poorly represented, and then you bring in Riddler, and it seems so offset to have him there and really not show this cool place that he may have lived. It just feels almost sparse and actually a bit like an afterthought. I'd say this, though. Overall, the set pieces and the animation are up to the usual Telltale levels, whether you like that or not. I just did feel that there were a couple weird bumps in the looks of some particular places, and certainly why they were there in the first place. Sound, music, and voice.
It's even worse than I expected. The man I knew was flawed, but he could still muster a little warmth.
Sounds like you knew a very different Riddler than the one I met. Right, let's agree to disagree, but I'll keep my peepers peeled for both of us. Slow down a bit. You're coming out blurry.
And you know what? Let's do music first. Now, as with the past episodes, depending on who you're playing, Batman or Bruce Wayne, you get somewhat different themes. And while the excellent but completely underused ability to choose which of the two of these guys you go out to the scenes to has mostly fled the series like a C-level villain, at the very least we get an almost morbid at times musical score, especially when Bruce Wayne's sitting down to discuss the next attempt to get the have-nots some haves, especially in the enemy stronghold. Now, with almost horror-like themes playing out with Harley or John Doe present, and strange stingers and the occasional metal bowl instrument offering a suitably creepy vibe, that sort of works to offset when you're Batman and you're battling it out and it switches to big synths and horns, and it's sort of some kind of battle to see who can get their track named Amazing Crap Just Happened the quickest. But it's understandable we wouldn't see a bunch of change-ups, especially because some people are going to be playing this game all in one sit-down, and you don't really want to change the music from moment to moment to moment to moment and never really return to those themes. So overall, I'd say it's pretty good, but sometimes it feels a little lacking. Sound. This is actually pretty good, and the original issues that I had talked about in episode 1 continue to be absent here, which is great because they were actually terrible. While here, you don't have the most discreet of sound effects. If something does happen in a particular area, usually there's a audio component to it and a bit of reverb or echo to make it sound like these bad guys are truly sitting directly under Gotham in some abandoned subway station, bereft of any worries about being captured, or feeling like Batman's really on top of a building talking with his frenemies about their next plans. It's not complex stuff at all, but here there is at least a little bit of work done. Also, the game's locations allow for a bit more environmental sounds that you can notice, with, for example, a discussion in an alleyway echoing out the sound of cars supposedly driving by just out of view. It's interesting to see how sound can so easily fool you into thinking there are more locations or that locations are larger and more complex when proper attention is made. Not bad. And of course, that brings us to voice. Whether due to the flight of fancy narrative that sometimes cropped up in those past titles or some other farther-reaching issue, this is the first episode where almost everyone sounded just right. Even the fact that if you want to play Bruce as some kind of doltish, lovesick boy after Catwoman and hear a bit of that trepidation every time he tries to steer the conversation towards if Catwoman missed him or not, or when Gordon comes into a room and sounds like he's a lawnmower set on chew scenery. This time he has a reason to be, and the occasional oddities between the emotional writing and the delivery, or the overwrought delivery and the writing, has been cropped down, and you get a nice fast movement regardless of who's in the scene and what they're doing. And it would absolutely be unfair to not say that Anthony Gruber as John Doe steals the show, and there's a couple reasons for me. One, the writing's spot on for the character, and it feels just a bit off from the expectations. Also, drawn out pronunciation of anything with an S in it has an almost rattlesnake sound to it that doesn't sound like really anyone else has done with that voice. It's a more subtle approach that doesn't have the instantly noticeable maniacal madness about it, but somehow still threatens that most likely this character's future is one made up of one part mayhem, one part murder. Also, somehow they really got you to feel for this version, making you truly question if Batman is making his, well, own worst enemy. If there's any weak points, it's the almost nonsensical meeting of Bruce and Bane in a street alley where there's a forced meeting, and it feels a little bit like the writers are trying to get the story into a corner as it wraps up, and even the voice actors don't really seem to deliver anything with that much gravitas. It's a weird moment in the game. But overall, I would say, voice, really well done. And of course, that brings us to gameplay and a bit about the story. Listen, Bruce is still up to his neck in knuckleheads infiltrating the Harlequin-led group of the somewhat expendables, and somehow getting everyone in the group to think that despite having more money than friggin' Scrooge McDuck, the first thing he wants to do is risk it all so he can referee over a bunch of supervillains fighting. I mean, it's like Big John McCarthy from the UFC referee stable. Put on a suit, because if he isn't holding off Amanda Waller and Commissioner Gordon from punching each other so hard in the head that they're gonna see back in time, he's stopping this little crime syndicate he's pretending to be a part of from exploding from the inside, which isn't surprising when your partners are like a bunch of dual-class D&D characters. You have the gangster lucha libre wrestler with his own source of bovine steroid. You have the hoity-toity and above everybody else, remorseless Mr. Freeze, and of course you have John Doe, who's at every turn pretty much appearing to be the most trustworthy of souls that you can imagine. And then you add Catwoman to the mix. It's sort of like a Caribbean cruise line. Someone's gonna get screwed. And in fact, that's sort of the crux of this story. The villains sort of need this guy. I don't even know if they'd be able to do anything if he wasn't there. It's a group of bad guys so poorly led that at times Bruce is the one suggesting things to do and move it along. And that's honestly one of the game's strengths. You can play Batman extremely close to the chest here, and some of the decisions are easily the darkest in the game series by a long stretch. And not just sitting there watching someone's face get panhandled while you keep your cover. It's the slow burn, that long con. It's like an Ocean's 5 movie's being made and everyone here is Andy Garcia. Some of the stuff you can do borders on questioning my original thoughts of who Batman really is, and that to me is excellent. It never goes past the cardinal sins expected, but man, if letting someone take the fall for you in this group of villains is the start, imagine what happens at the end. And some of the careless ways you can deal with folks allows for Batman to have a flexibility in his decision making that might make some gamers say, finally. Let's be honest. Batman is well honed enough that if someone wants to go outside the box, that's still in a damned box, because the character's so black and white on things that it's like going to the 3-point line. It's still points. Here, though, there are many times where there's a subtlety to what you can do and where that end goal lies that I really love. For example, there's one particular scene at the end of the game, or very close to the end of this episode, that is really quite dark in the way you sort of just let people down around you to continue to head towards your end goal, and I love that. Now, as I said before, the ability to choose between Batman and Bruce Wayne, something I loved from prior seasons and episodes, is not here. And once again, I can only assume that's a concession to the difficulty of writing all that and having voice actors for both scenes. But I have to be honest, it's sorely missed. And that means nothing really new comes up in the game in the gameplay department. And instead, Episode 3 rests solely in the comfort of its story. And despite me feeling that the prior episodes couldn't stand like that without some good action scenes or that duality of Batman and Bruce Wayne, I feel that episode 3 does it a little bit better. And now when it comes to the length, the game ran about 2 hours and 5 minutes, so that's a perfect length for me for this kind of title. Fun factor. You know what's unique? This has a less bombastic battle, though one particular fight has you flying up and down staircases and engaged in a long drawn out battle where you're not sure if you're getting the upper hand or if you're going to be set up to have it chopped off at the end. That was actually really cool. But instead, this is much more about seeing the story play out, and many of the choices you make are long draws that won't appear in this episode or maybe even in the next. It might just be something hinted at later. I'm not quite sure. I'm fine with that, though, because Batman Episode 3 doesn't make the mistakes of trying to hammer things home that matter. Instead, it hammers home that you are actually making some decisions. Will they matter in the end? This is the question we always ask of these games. Most titles like this don't do a great job of differentiating that they do, except for some hints, and Telltale games have never been the strongest when it comes to pulling their end game. They just don't really know how to wrap up. For example, Telltale's Guardians of the Galaxy didn't do a very good job, but here, we're in the middle of the actual series, and really, this thing is just sort of letting you go and make those choices on your own, and at the very least, that means it's a more interesting episode. So as you guys know, I rate games like this on a jump in now or a wait kind of rating scale, sort of a thing that grows as each episode comes out. I have to say, this episode has certainly made it so that I feel safe telling people if they thought 1 or 2 looked good, 3 is better, and certainly it is a safer time to jump in now. If you want to wait until all of them are done so that you can jump in at the end and just play them all in one sitting, I think that's great. This is one where it totally feels safe to jump in and you would get 1, 2, and 3, and ended up causing a lot of discussion in the couple people I know who played it, which was surprising because the others didn't do so. So anyway, that's it for me. If you like the video, give it a thumbs up. If you dislike the video, give it a thumbs down. Maybe check out Twitter. If you want to help out the channel, you can become a patron on Patreon. We have a ton of different things that we do, and that really does help the channel, and it helps me give you guys reviews that aren't 2 minutes long or filled with sponsored bullcrap. You can also use the Amazon affiliate links, which is in the description. Anything you do on Amazon, that helps. Peace out, and enjoy the rest of your week.